Good morning, everyone. Welcome to September. I don't know where the year has gone. It seems like I barely left the house in the last 6 months since March, but now it's September already. And welcome to that day. I think today's September and a full moon. So it's a good time to talk about the new normal, what's going to happen to supply chains post COVID-19. So welcome, everyone. Let's just kind of jump into this topic. So this is our weekly dynamic dialogue webinars, open to supply chain professionals. It's a forum for sharing a lot of information, ideas, thoughts. We'll do a short presentation and then take questions or comments and we'll wrap up. I did not change the link for August to September for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into, but just suffice it to say, if you have the link for today, it's good for September, and September is a month that has actually 5 Tuesdays in it. So I'll talk about that at the end, but I'm going to do some topics of my own, and then I have a guest speaker that I'm lining up for the end of the month. So, well, this is not the right slide. Let's see. So sorry about that. Trust is from last week, but this week now we're going to talk about the new normal. So the first thing about the new normal is safety has a whole different look in the workplace. I spent most of my career in and around factories, and safety is a big deal. And I take it very seriously for the factories that I'm in, whether they're my suppliers, my customers, my company, my clients, all of the above. Safety is very much paramount on my mind. I don't want anyone to get hurt. And even though factories have done a lot in the last decades of even the last century to make factories a lot safer, the kinds of things that go on in factories are inherently dangerous and people can get hurt. And I never like to see anyone get hurt. I've seen a few accidents, but I've seen a lot of scars on people and worked with people who had those scars, and I don't want anyone else to have them. So I take safety very seriously. And now with COVID, it's not only being safe with machinery and equipment, but it's being safe with the individuals that are working there. So that's something that we're going to talk about. That's really one of the strategies companies have to have, not only for now, but in going forward, to make sure that the workers are safe and anyone exposed to the workplace is safe. Then we're going to look at sourcing and resourcing. In supply chain, that's one of our primary functions, is sourcing. And now we're looking at possibly resourcing things from suppliers that are in locations that may not be as desirable. You hear a lot of things about China and the trade agreements with China and what's going on there. But there's also a number of other countries that have been hit by the pandemic. Europe has a number of countries, Germany, Spain, Italy, been hit very hard. Mexico, Central America, and there's countries in South America, specifically Brazil and Peru, that have been hit extra hard in these areas. And it's important for them, for all of us in supply chain, to make sure that we understand where our suppliers are, where we want them to be, and take a look at the resourcing opportunities. And along with that is the supply chain architectures. These are the way the supply chain is set up. And it's not just suppliers and sourcing, but it's also your logistics personnel and carriers, the way you ship parts and where you want to ship them to and from. It also involves the distributors, retailers, and your customers. So how can we design our architectures for supply chains for the future? Supplier management, if we're going to be changing suppliers potentially and redoing supply chain architectures. And as we know, it's not as business as usual to manage suppliers. So we'll look at that and how that's going to change a little bit. Risk by itself is a huge factor. Risk of pandemic was there. And if you look back and read some of the experts, they said that this was going to happen. They didn't know when or how or what it would look like, obviously, since this is a new virus. But the risk of a pandemic, the risk of this kind of coronavirus, not this one specifically, but a corona type of virus, has been around for a while. So we're going to look at why this drives us back to doing some fundamentals and basic things that are inherent in supply chains. We're going to look about how you can integrate risk-based decision-making into the supply chain, and we'll talk about how we design the new business as usual. So let's just jump right into safety. This goes to suppliers and customers, employees, visitors, all of these things. So one thing you know that companies have implemented a lot of new protocols. A lot of companies have limited their on-site workforce. They've all but banned non-company personnel except for key maintenance work and maybe a few customer visits or very much VIPs, but very few companies are letting extraneous people into the work site. Maintenance is the primary reason that they are allowing that. Workstations are being configured to allow more space. If you've been to the grocery store, you see that they have yellow lines and different colored lines, and they have 6 feet indicators to tell you where to stand in line. So there's a lot of things that a lot of companies are doing to allow that space. One company that's local here to me is a very large, they're a biomedical company. They spent a lot of time and money in the last couple years reconfiguring all their office spaces. They changed from cubicles, the traditional kind of cubicles, to the open offices where workers sit at long tables, almost like dining tables. They sit on both sides, and that's where they work. So they have kind of lockers where they can keep some things, but they sit at the tables. There's lots of outlets to plug your things into. And the idea is from these open offices is that it fosters communication and it's going to help people work and collaborate more. Well, they've done this, they spent money on this, and they're now reconfiguring again to revert to a more cubicle-like environment. It's not exactly what they had before because they wanted to get some of that fostering of communication into the new space, but the shoulder to shoulder sitting at these dining room type tables is out. They're not doing that. And it's too hard to put people 6 feet apart in that configuration. You don't get as many, the density is too much. There's not enough space. So it's a crazy world. But companies are changing workplaces and the workplace configuration to accommodate both the workers' needs, but also the workers' wants, because they're taking into consideration what people feel comfortable with and how they want to be able to return to a workspace. Many people are still working from home. That's going to continue for a while. Some people are saying that they've been told they're going to work from home into the 2020 timeframe, 2021 timeframe, excuse me, but we don't know. It's all to be determined. So there's a lot of businesses that have bought lots of hand sanitizer. Some companies didn't have any of those before. Now they have lots. I think that's going to continue everywhere, not just in workplaces, but you'll see that in grocery stores. You'll see that in any kind of store that they have a lot more of that. There were stores that had bathrooms with no hot water. They had cold water only for washing, and that's being reconsidered. It's very expensive to run that hot water if it isn't there already, but I know different places are considering that. Businesses, airlines, gyms are now receiving deep cleans, hotel rooms, in restaurants, incredible amounts of what they call deep cleaning. So there's a lot more antibacterial treatments of surfaces. So it's getting into the nooks and the crannies that might hold those germs that might make someone sick. I think I saw American Airlines is the first one that is going to actually start using a coating in their cabins that is supposed to help prevent or kill this germ on the surfaces. So it's a lot of extensive works going on into that. Again, visits by outsiders, you're going to have to plan more if you're going to be the visitor, and if you're going to host someone, you're going to have to do a lot more planning. They're going to have to vet individuals, things like taking temperatures, asking questions, filling out questionnaires. It used to be, are you a citizen? Where do you live? Some of these kinds of questions. Now it's going to be, take your temperature. Where have you been the last 2 weeks? Have you visited any of these kinds of things? And if they can get the tests that are the inexpensive ones that give you the really rapid results, I think you're going to see those, that they're going to require people to take those tests before they are allowed into various businesses. And that's not only like manufacturing workspaces, but I think that could be possibly at the grocery stores, at Target, at Walmart, any of these kinds of things. So the welcome mats that companies have had in the past, those are rolled up and put away for now. I don't know how much they're going to come back, but it's going to take a while for that to come back and let people come in with open arms. And you'll see in supply chain, we've always traveled, and I've made a point of making sure my teams were ready, willing, and able to get in cars, on planes, on whatever, to go visit suppliers and handle issues, solidify relationships, evaluate performance. And every once in a while, you meet someone who's not too enthusiastic about travel. That's going to be a lot more easy to accommodate now. So in the past, I had staffs where I said, if you can't travel and you won't travel at all, this is probably not a good job for you, because you're going to need to be able to meet with suppliers and do different things. Now, at least for the short run, that is going to be more people are going to tolerate that more, but eventually we're going to get back to traveling and visiting suppliers, because it's very important to do that. The other thing that I think you're going to see about safety is sick leave policies. So if someone feels ill or has any kind of a sign of a fever, you're going to be sent home. I think with more willingness for companies to not track sick leave time so much, maybe they'll give you some more of that. Maybe they'll make some allowances for things. For you, if you feel ill because they don't want you contaminating anyone else in the workplace. And I also think they have to accommodate people who are taking care of their children at home, and maybe their elderly parents or aunts or whatever, for anybody in the family that might be ill. So it might be that you are in a protected class and you've got some issues, like I say, small children that are not going back to school, and you may accommodate people who are taking care of family members who are ill of any age, any condition. I think companies are going to have to be more tolerant of that, because that's going to keep everyone in the workplace that is in the workplace safe. And as I said, I think the work from home is going to continue for the next several months. Then we get to sourcing and resourcing. So supply chain professionals are updating sourcing strategies and the processes that they use to source and select suppliers. We're hearing a lot about relocating manufacturing, bringing it back to the US, getting it out of China, doing this and that and the other. But each company is looking to see where they are today, where they want to be in the future, and what that would look like to get from here to there. Moving work or changing suppliers is not easy, it's not quick, and companies need to avoid knee-jerk reactions. These things take time to do as well. So knee-jerk reactions may get something started that doesn't get finished for quite a while and can really cause a problem. Customers may be demanding change, and I wouldn't be surprised if these fluctuations continue for the foreseeable future. Eventually it's going to settle down, but I think the levels are going to be different than pre-COVID, and the sourcing activity that goes on is going to be just in flux for a while. Suppliers are going to have to react and adapt to their customer signals. Customers are reacting to their customers, and so that's trickling down or maybe rolling down the supply chain. But each organization has to evaluate their own business in light of the environment, in light of their financial situation, in light of their customers and their products and the materials inside. But customers is a big part, because the markets for a lot of these products is not just here in the United States. So if everything is made here in the United States, that may be fine for the customers in the United States. But if you have customers around the world, it's going to be very difficult to make everything here and then ship it. And it's going to be more expensive to make it here and ship it around the world than it would be to make it in different parts of the world. So I think you're going to see some companies think about that resourcing strategy and figure out what's best for them, not only now and in the next 6 months, but in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. Because many of you know, if you've been through this, moving suppliers from one place to another it takes time, it takes money, and it's not always a slam dunk. So you're adding more risk into an equation that's already pretty risk heavy in the first place. So you want to be careful about this. So suppliers and customers need to share their analysis, their decisions, their plans for the future. There are businesses that are hurting. They've had reduced demand, reduced availability of materials, and then you have some that have excess inventories. And you're seeing both of those in the same company. Some kind of companies have shortages on lots of parts and then inventory excesses on others. Some companies have cash flow issues. So you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing some worker furloughs where people are furloughed or laid off, and that has to be dealt with, how they're going to come back, what way they're going to come back, all of those kinds of things. And that applies not only to the workforce and the safety that I was talking about, but to the sourcing. Because if you have suppliers that have furloughed employees, that have laid off employees, that no longer have the capacity and the capabilities that they had pre-COVID, they're going to have to build that up too. And that's going to take them some time. Companies experiencing cash flows are going to be wanting to renegotiate their payment terms, maybe renegotiate their business terms, their conditions for taking orders. They may say, I need some cash upfront in order to take your order. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. There's going to be a lot of flexibility required, and there's going to be a lot of communication. So it's more important than ever between the internal stakeholders and the organizations and your external stakeholders to communicate, to make sure that you verify and don't assume anything. Keep in mind that change is happening very quickly between companies, internal to companies and between companies and external to companies, and they're going to have to stay in very much in close contact and in communication about that. So just because something was agreed upon in July, now it's September, and that agreement may not be able to be carried out the way you envisioned in July. If you remember, a lot of states, a lot of different areas of the world were opening up in June and July. And then all of a sudden in July, a lot of spikes happened. Again, not only here in the US and a lot of places, but around the world. And so you're going to see that. Right now, there's big spikes in India. They're having huge numbers of cases per day. So if you have business that's done in India, whether it's done in a manufacturing organization or a service organization, a software support group, there's going to be a lot of changes, and companies are just going to have to be flexible. So things are so dynamic, we're just going to have a lot of this trust but verify going on. So trust your suppliers if they've been trustworthy before and earned your trust, but verify, and verify often. This is going to solidify and strengthen some relationships. Other relationships are going to suffer and maybe be dissolved at the end, or need to be dissolved and discontinued. So when the dust settles from where we are now, companies are going to have some strong customer supplier bonds, but they're also going to have some gaps. So you want to be thinking about where those are now so that you can start to close the gaps before they become gaping holes. And those suppliers that you can rely on, if you can rely on them for 3 things, are there 3 more things that you can rely on them for? This is going to require intimate supplier knowledge. You really need to relook at your segmentation. Who are your suppliers and which ones make these critical parts for you? What are the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers of your suppliers that might be critical? So you may have a supplier that's not especially critical, but if there are critical components in there, like things that come from China, a lot of electronic things, they come from Japan, they come from China, they come from Asia in general. You need to understand where these things are coming from, which suppliers your suppliers are using, and how they're managing that, what the availability of product is, what the availability of their workforce is. Are they back to work in the full numbers that they were at pre-COVID? Many, many organizations are not back at that same capability and capacity that they were, say, in the January, February timeframe. We've got an election coming up that I know we're all probably painfully aware of. But after that, we're going to have a better projection on some trade agreements, tariffs, and how the government might be proceeding with that. Right now, a lot of things are up in the air. Both candidates for president have different perspectives on that. And I think that once we have an election decision, that we'll have a better understanding of what might be happening in 2021 and beyond. So as we develop more, not only vaccines, but treatments for the coronavirus, we're going to have a better picture on how the supply chain should be structured, could be structured, we're going to know more about the gaps and the risks going forward, because again, this affects many countries, affects every country in the world, except Antarctica. They have no cases there. They're all locked down for the season right now. But who knows what's going to happen down there, because they open up again the 1st of October. So I'm sure they're going to be taking a lot of extraneous measures to make sure that the people that come down in large numbers every what they call their summer season starting in October don't carry the vaccine, or don't carry the virus, and don't spread it. So companies are going to redesign their architectures to fit these new parameters and all of the things they expect. So we are very close to the election. We're not quite, just under 2 months away. September, today's the 1st, and the election is November 3rd. So we're getting close, and we'll have more idea of what's going to happen from a governmental and a regulatory perspective. So the architecture of supply chains has evolved in a lot of cases from what started with some initial make-buy decisions and some things going on. So companies are reevaluating their footprints. They're looking at it by continent, by country, by city, by many things. They're looking at all of the things going on with not only tier 1 suppliers, but tier 2 and tier 3. They're evaluating moving out of Asia potentially, but if they do, where are they going to go? So they have to look at that, and you have to have a place to go before you actually pack up and move. It's like if you're moving your home, you can pack your stuff up, but if you have no place to go, then you have to have an interim thing, and you have to have somewhere to live in the meantime. So you have to have inventory to live off of if you're going to shut one down before you have another one. And at what stage do you have the new supplier up and running before you turn off the old one? That's the age-old question, and the old project management. How are we going to see this project through to make sure that we don't have gaps in our inventory? And that's difficult to do when the demands on inventory in so many products, so many companies, so many areas of the world is very volatile right now. There's a lot of up and down, and demand surging in areas, demand drawing up in others. So other low-cost countries like Mexico, Central and South America, other Asian countries, Eastern Europe, they all can be appealing for companies who choose to move out of China or out of any other area they may be in. But if you're not familiar with these territories, and you're not familiar with managing suppliers in those areas, then your company has a lot to learn, and you're going to have to set that foundation and build that trust and those relationships. And that takes time. Many suppliers have multiple manufacturing locations. And if your suppliers do have multiple locations, especially across multiple continents, like maybe in Eastern Europe and South America, or Central America and Asia, you might be able to work with your supplier to actually move the product for you. That way they share the risk, they share the cost of moving from location to location, and you collaborate and you work on that closer together. That can be a big plus in some cases, but if that goes south, that's very difficult too, because then you have one company, whether it's the customer or the supplier, looking at the issues, trying to figure out how to get this resolved. And if your supplier has a problem, then whether it's your fault or not as a customer, you have a problem. So you have to be able to manage that, anticipate that. And again, project management skills are essential. So it costs money to do this. It is never free to move from one place to another. I don't care what anyone tells you. It takes time, and it takes some investment and very good project management. So customers and suppliers have to be aware of this and working together. You can look at a lot of different options, like multiple sources or dual sources. But I spent some time in defense and aerospace, and I spent some time in some high-tech areas of things that were medical equipment, like gas chromatographs and mass spectrometers. Those volumes are not very high, and dual sourcing really isn't an option, and multiple sourcing is way out there, because you were making 20, 30, 50 of these a year. So dual sourcing those kinds of volumes is not really a viable option. And then you have to look at the extent of automation that's incorporated into manufacturing your products at your suppliers. And you have to look at who owns that manufacturing automation and who designed it, and if there's proprietary or intellectual property involved. So tooling involved. If you have to move tools, that's not inexpensive, and that takes time as well. And that you have to have inventory to cover that. If you take a tool down and you put it in and you ship it somewhere. So you've got a lot of different things to deal with. You've got customer preferences to deal with. You have to make sure you understand what your customers' company's goals are, what your own company's, and then make sure that aligns with your suppliers. And again, we're not talking about just tier 1, but tier 2 and tier 3. I know a lot of people who feel American companies should focus on the US, but I remind people that Ford and General Motors did not get to be the huge behemoth companies that they are today by only manufacturing and selling cars in the US. A lot of their business is outside of the US, a lot of their markets. And that's true for technology companies and a lot of a lot of other more mundane type manufacturing, not just cars. But if you have the markets outside of that, you have to look at what's going on with those companies, and you have to look at where the marketplaces are, what the attitude toward those countries is for selling into the countries without having any manufacturing presence. China and India have 2.7 billion, about 1.4 and 1.3 billion of the total population of the world. So together with Asia, the continent of Asia, it's 4.6 billion people, which is 60% of the planet's people. So 60% of the people on this planet live in the continent of Asia. Here in the US, we are third in the world with population at 330 million. So China and India have 1.3, 1.4 billion, and we have 330, which is less than a quarter of either of those. And those are both contained on the continent of Asia. So we're looking at moving this lever. So if you look at North America in its entirety, which is the US, Canada, and Central America, it's still only 600 million people, which is less than half of either China or India. And again, with 4.6 billion in Asia, that 600 million for North America really doesn't compare. It's only 7.6 of the world's population. So companies can't ignore these marketplaces. They can't ignore the resources, because not every resource that we need to do anything with is located here in the United States. We don't have large gold mines. We don't have a lot of tin and tantalum and tungsten, titanium. A lot of those products aren't found here in the United States. So it has to be imported somehow, and it has to be located. And again, it has to be transfigured into goods and services, and that goes out to not only the US, but to the entire world. So there are a lot of factors when you look at the architecture of your company and the supply chain. And the truth is that these supply chains, again, they evolved over time. Companies made some make-buy decisions decades ago, trying to be less vertically integrated and more horizontally integrated, more to focus on what businesses they were doing and the activities that they were doing. But after those first few strategic decisions, some of these have just kind of morphed. So when a lot of these outsourcing decisions were made, companies were not going to China. My first examples with outsourcing, and I'm not ancient, although I'm not young either, was to countries like Singapore, Malaysia. We went there. I was working for Hewlett Packard. We had an extensive presence there, and that was in the late 90s. So in the last 20 years, China has just exploded with a lot of work. India is the same way. There was not much work going on in India about the year 2000, but since then that's exploded. So those are big opportunities for markets, and they're big opportunities for good skilled workforce. So you have to look at both of those things and how that's going to work into your architecture. Once you get your architecture put into place, or at least designed, then we have to address the supplier management. So we look at sourcing and designs of the supply chain, and then we have to say, how are we going to manage this in the new normal after we come back? Can we use the same tools and techniques that we had before? As I said before, I'm a big advocate for visiting suppliers and travel. So I think that you see a lot when you walk through your supplier's factory. You compare that to the last time you were there. You look at things like the cleanliness, the safety that they use, the attitude of the worker, the conditions of the workers. You look at the changes from time to time. How many workers are there? What kinds of work are they doing? What's the investment in new equipment? Are they keeping the same equipment, or if you've been there 3 years in a row, do they have some new equipment coming in, or can you see actively that they're preparing space in the workforce, in the workplace, for new equipment? What's the efficiency, productivity, utilization of the factory? Are they adding shifts, cutting shifts back, adding people? You can kind of tell that when you go there and walk around. So you can find a lot of things, and you can uncover risks. You can uncover maybe some opportunities, like a new machine, and say, how come we can't get our work on that machine? You can look for potential issues. There's a lot of things that can be lurking and are possible impacts to your business, but there's also opportunity. If you don't go kick those tires once in a while, you won't see those. But you also have to look deeper at the company. You have to look at some of their financial challenges. You have to ask for information. This is always a problem when customers are dealing with suppliers that are privately held. If they're SEC companies, it's no problem to get their quarterly reports, annual reports, if they're publicly traded. Even if they're publicly traded in other countries, you can sometimes get that more readily. But if they're private organizations, it's often hard to get that information. And nowadays, with so many companies unstable, customers need that to verify that they actually are viable suppliers for the future. Not only for existing suppliers, but think about also, we just talked about moving things. If you're going to select a new supplier, you really want to make sure that that supplier is viable and is able to do what you need them to do. So, and still maintain your privacy and confidentiality of your potential or existing supplier. So a lot of this information is available already. You can find things like debt to equity ratios. You can look at percentages of increase for workers' revenue. Is your revenue increasing year over year? Ask them what their annual growth rate is. Ask them for the last 3 years or the last 5 years. Ask them what the potential impact is to their company this year. If they don't want to tell you in dollars, ask them if they can tell you in percent. Then it still gives you a reference for how much impact all of these things are having on them. The revenue, the debt, the workforce, all of that works together, and you can ask a lot of questions. My expectation is that you're going to see a lot of accountants understand that their clients, these suppliers that are the customer suppliers, are going to need to prepare these kinds of statements and have these readily available for their customer, their client who is a potential supplier, to get new business or maintain business. So they're going to be able to support that and give you information about a supplier through their accountant that doesn't expose everything, but gives you enough to have some confidence that the business is viable. Payment terms are changing already, and the payment process, the cash flow, companies are now making payments with placing an order. So you place an order and you pay either for the order upfront, like you do with Amazon. You want this blender from Amazon, then you pay for it and then they ship it to you. But traditionally, if you've ordered things from suppliers, you order it, you get it delivered, and then you pay for them. And then you have net 30, net 45, net 60. Some companies have net 90. So depending on the customer supplier relationship, depending on the viability and cash flow situation of either the customer or the supplier, you're going to see a lot of payment terms change. And by law, small businesses with government contractors do not have to take payment terms worse than net 30. And so I think you're going to see some of them ask for payments much better than net 30 or slightly better. So this is all going to be open to negotiation and changing. Again, these relationships that are forged by the pandemic are going to be stronger. They're going to be more collaborative to go forward. And relationships that aren't strong are probably going to dissolve. And you're going to see those customers either find new suppliers, or maybe the suppliers are going to fold and they're going to have to support the customer as they close down their own business, which is not a good situation. So as employees, as supply chain professionals, we need to find new and innovative ways to find these suppliers, to forge relationships, to get new relationships and solidify existing relationships, and most of all, to solve problems and add value back into the company. So anybody who's unwilling to learn new things and do things differently, I think is going to get left behind. So it's going to be a challenge. Companies have implemented a lot of new protocols and limited their on-site workforce, as I said, but there's still a lot of changes going on in that case. We talked a little bit about this before. You're going to see these different guidelines, travel requirements, these deep cleaning. A lot of these things are still going on, and they're going to continue. I've heard people say, well, we won't have to do that once we get a vaccine, and I don't know that I agree with that. I think some of the very extensive things can be lessened and weaned back, but I don't think a lot of this is going to go away. So I think that once we recognize what can happen here, we're going to be moving forward. Oh, this is double. Sorry about this. So risk. Supplier risk is a big deal. It's going to be a key activity definitely in the next 2 years and on past that, depending on what else happens and how we work on this together. So we're going to have to continually assess our suppliers, both the existing suppliers, the ones that are legacy that we've carried on, and then all the new ones. So we're going to talk about how to assess those suppliers in an upcoming webinar. Mitigation plans, impact analysis, all of that is going to need to be done in more detail. That kind of work always contains an element of guesswork, but it has to be based on some facts and some figures, whatever information you can get. So you're going to see a lot more analysis in that area. What is the probability of that? And if that happens, what's the worst that can happen? What's the best that could happen? And what's the most likely scenario, which is going to be in between the two. So you're going to see a lot more of this risk analysis, and that's going to bring in different ways of thinking, different ways of making decisions. So you want to be prepared for surprises, both internal and external, because there are suppliers that you probably don't think that will go out of business that might, or might switch their business to a different type of product or service. From an external perspective. From internal perspectives, I think you're going to see a lot of workers make some different decisions, ask for some different types of workspace, work accommodations, schedules, all of this kind of stuff. So you want to make sure that you've got the skill sets you need in your organization. And I think we're all going to have to learn to ask for help a little bit more and be honest about the fact that we don't have all the answers. We don't have it all covered. So we do need some help from some experts, and identify those experts and find the help that you need. We're going to all have an increased awareness of now things that can happen, of risk in general. We've gone through things like in the past, hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, fires, floods, but now we have a serious health issue to throw into the mix of that. We've had the bird flu, we've had a little bit of the Ebola here in the United States, not too much. The numbers of cases here were very small. The H1N1 virus a few years ago. But again, for the United States, we didn't have the impacts that other areas did. And if you've spent time in some of those other areas, you can see that some of those bird flu, H1N1 things lingered in the general population, with things like wearing masks and gloves and protecting their washing your hands more, and doing all of those kinds of things. So that's going to be part of our new normal. Assurance of supply is always what we need to worry about. So we have to worry about that very short term because we have to keep companies going. But we also have done a lot in recent years to lean out our supply chains, especially inventories. We've reduced inventories through processes like just in time, doing a lot of leaning, the 5 S's, getting rid of the waste. A lot of 3PLs have been put into use by many companies. And a lot of companies have worked very hard to reduce and eliminate safety stocks in their organizations. They've pushed that responsibility down through the supply chain so that everyone's involved in that, and not the last person holding all of that inventory, either in raw material or finished goods materials. What we've seen now is that lead times have doubled in many cases. Imports from different parts of the world have increased at times over the last few months, even more, up to almost 300%. So when you have lead times that are going to be volatile, and if you're moving things around, and some companies are going to move things around, that's a certainty. How many, how far, all of that is kind of to be determined. But when you look at that, the lead times are going to be affected. The lead times have to be incorporated into however you project, however you purchase material. So you're going to see some shortages, you're going to see some excesses, you're going to see some bullwhip effect where things like everybody wants the toilet paper now, and there's not enough toilet paper there to satisfy everybody's extra insurance that they need because they're afraid it won't be there. So you're going to see a lot of changes in that. And all of these are going to work back through your architecture, your suppliers, your design, how you manage these suppliers, back to your sourcing decisions. So you're going to see this work its way up and down the supply chain and throughout your processes that you're using. So companies are going to go back to basics. They're going to remember how important relationships are, the suppliers that they count on. I've heard a number of people, some of my clients and some of my colleagues say, you know, I found out who I can really depend on in this situation. I've got suppliers that I will work for the rest of my life to make sure they get good business from my company because they have helped us out so much. And then other times they say, man, I thought that supplier was a good one, but they have just let me down over and over and over. So you're going to see a lot of this. You're going to see some new skills. You're going to see some risk-based decision-making. You're going to see a lot more collaboration just because the traditional negotiation and having these levers is not as clear as it was, and it may not be as consistent as it was. So a company that had leverage may not have it again for any number of reasons. You're going to see more computer skills because people are going to be needing to analyze the data, turning it into information. So you're going to need more computer skills, and you're going to need more analysts to help you do that. Back to good old sales and operations planning, matching the supply to the demand. The demand, I think, is going to be volatile in many, many, many areas, and companies are going to be tasked with matching their supply that they're creating to meet that demand, not to overproduce, not to underproduce. So that is an old process that a lot of companies have not put much focus on because they have automated that through MRPs, ERPs, even a lot of spreadsheet programs, but you're going to see that change. You're going to see back to basics on that. And again, just risk management, end-to-end supply chain assessments, not just between you and your supplier, but how does that affect the whole supply chain? And I think you're going to see a lot more formalized strategies. You're going to see companies actually write these down, post these in their offices so that everyone knows this is our strategy, this is our plan, here's how we're going to make it through whatever this challenge is, and we're going to work on it that way. So what was, is, will be the new normal? I don't know exactly. No one knows for sure. I don't have a crystal ball, and neither does anyone else. But there's a lot of speculation, and there's a lot of information that is telling us probably what's going to happen in some cases. So in environment, we're still going to have some economic challenges. This has been a tough economic year for a lot of people, a lot of companies, and you're not going to see that go back very quickly. So you've seen a lot of very large companies file for bankruptcy, a lot of retail chains, a lot of malls be shut down. So that changes the framework of how people shop, what they shop for, a lot of different things going on there. Regulations, both from your company, the local regulations, legal ramifications. So there's a lot of things there that are going to have to be dealt with, and that is not going to be consistent across a large area. And you're going to see a lot of focus on safety for workers, for customers, for visitors, for all of that. So whether it's not being able to go to that bar that you always went to on Friday night for a while longer, maybe that's all it is. But there could be very extensive, like I say, it's too early to tell, even though we're several months into this, and we'd hoped, I think a lot of us, that we would be back to some kind of at least mass gatherings and working. It's not happening. So there are a lot of challenges, but there's opportunities too. So even though the economy is going to be tough and volatile, we're seeing some new products. Companies are getting new customers, they're getting new suppliers. So there's opportunity in all of that. There's always opportunity for improvement when there's something new and different. We're seeing a lot of emphasis on relationships, and I'm seeing that companies are saying, we didn't have a formal supplier relationship program before, but we're putting one in place. This is not a bad thing to be doing and putting resources on now, is these relationship management programs. And these are very important to a lot of companies. The supplier transparency, has to be a lot more than it was before. So I know there were customer supplier relationships where you had everything that you guarded pretty carefully. You held a lot of things, as they say, close to your chest. You didn't want to share information. You're seeing both parties more willing to share a lot more information to help each other out and to collaborate and move forward. We're seeing a lot more communication, a lot more sharing of goals, issues, challenges, and a lot more helping out in a lot of different ways. Supply chain, we are at the center of that. So as supply chain professionals, we are in the hub of this wheel that turns all these things. So we have been and still are the conduit of supplier management and supplier communication. What this is going to lead to is there are companies that do not have CPOs today, but they're going to have them, I think, by the middle of 2021. They've recognized that the supply chain is a big deal, and they need C-suite people in those roles to help manage these kinds of issues. And they've seen the extent of what can happen from certain things, so they're going to put people in those places, which is a great opportunity for a lot of people. You're going to see supply chain in a much more leadership position, especially if they start changing a lot of these architectures, moving things around. You're going to see the other executives in the company listen more closely to the supply chain, pay attention more, and give them more respect for what they can do, because they're understanding that this is a very volatile thing. And as we in supply chain know, we can do a lot of things. We're pretty clever, we're pretty innovative, we're pretty creative, and we've always been able to come up with some great innovative approaches, out of box thinking, and I think we're going to get more respect for that, which is not a bad thing. So personally, I look forward to increased workplace flexibility for workers. I think that has to be something that many companies who never considered it before will embrace going forward. Some more readily than others. Some will still be a little bit kicking and screaming, but they're gonna have to do that. You're gonna see more supply chains that have not evolved, but that are strategically constructed and architected. So you're gonna see that design very deliberate. We're gonna see better relationships and a better framework in a lot of companies for supplier relationships and recognition of what that means, not only between the customer and the supplier, but the effects that that can have on the rest of the company. You're going to see a lot more analysis, and you're going to see a lot more risk-based thinking and decision-making. You're going to see a lot of options. People that didn't think there were a lot of options before are now going to be considering those. The innovation, the creativity is going to be more valued. And again, I think the overall profession is going to be elevated. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity in that. So my strive to thrive for this week is from Jean-Marc. Whether we succeed or fail in life depends on our ability to conquer the challenges in our opportunities and to discover the opportunities in our challenges. So the more we think about this and the more we incorporate this kind of thinking, the better we're going to be able to succeed. So next week, we're going to talk about supply chain flexibility. So what that means and how you can put that into your supply chain. The 15th, we're going to talk about what follow up and follow through means to both the customer and the supplier. So we're going to look at that from both perspectives. On the 22nd, I'm going to talk about assessing supplier performance during COVID-19. So a lot of companies had expectations set for their suppliers. The suppliers knew what the customers wanted, but the pandemic has kind of thrown a wrench in all that. So how do you hold your suppliers accountable without unnecessarily penalizing them for things that are out of their control, but also how can you reward them for above and beyond performance, and what does that mean? How can you distinguish to who's doing what? So those, and then the 29th, we're going to have a guest speaker. So if you haven't signed up, you can sign up now at on our webpage, purple-link.net/events. That will take you there, and you can sign up for the month of September. You can sign up for a month, 2 months, or you can sign up for the quarter. If you sign up for the quarter, I will do it through the end of the year. So you'll get 4 months for the price of 3. If you want to talk more about this, you should set up a 30-minute call with me. If you put in callwithjane.com, then you'll learn how Purple Link can help your business. We can talk about how that will work. I've got 2 webinars starting this week, actually. CPSM number 3, that's going to be held in the evenings, and then CPSM number 1, that's going to be held during the day, primarily because a lot of people want to take that during lunch, and I've got some East Coast people, so I'm expanding my business as well. So that's what we're doing. So thank you all today. It was great to see some of you, and I really am appreciative of all of you who watch these on your own time and are unable to make them live, but I know a lot of you are very diligent about making sure that you do watch them, because I can see the click rates from the reports I get. So I very much appreciate that. And I will look forward to seeing all of you next week and talking about supplier flexibility.